not only was I not the only one going through it, but I feel the only one I was hurting was myself by not speaking up and speaking out.
My favorite thing about soccer is when I don't even have time to think. I just react. Honestly, the game on the field, that's the easy part for me. My biggest struggle has always been the game, inside my own head.
Man, every time I see the promo, it reminds me how awesome the film is itself. It was just so enjoyable to watch, and just not just to see you in action, Jack, just get the moves on, but also just kind of your whole journey there. So I just wanted to start off by saying, hi there, I'm Dr. Mena Mirhom, board certified psychiatrist and chief wellbeing officer for Athletes for Hope. And Athletes for Hope is the largest athlete-led sports philanthropy organization in the world. For the past 20 years, we've been engaging in the community, bringing athletes from the Olympic, Paralympic, professional, and all kinds of other levels to engage in the community. And I have the privilege to oversee our well-being program, where we got to meet, the incredible Jack Beer, who's been working with us for quite some time there. And I just want to first say hello to Jack and allow him just to say a quick hi to the audience here.
Hi, guys. Yeah, pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jack. And I want to also introduce, we've got a special privilege to have Coach Brian Wiese with us. And I just want to give you the chance to say hello from all the way from Georgetown, to introduce yourself and to say hello to folks as well.
Hello, I'm Brian Wiese. I was Jack's coach for his time in Georgetown, and I wish I was with him over in Hawaii where he is right now.
Don't we all, man? That's quite the background. We were all wishing we can be in Hawaii right now. We're really excited to be able to talk about this, the mental health journey, the unique pressures that athletes are facing today. How does it feel for you to just watch this film, to see it come to life? I know it's been over, 5 years and a lot's sort of happened. What's it been like for you to just kind of visit this your story here?
Yeah, it's pretty cool to reconnect with my coach, with my teammates in different ways now, 5 years later, to look back on a journey that was once really, really scary and had a lot of anxiety, and look back and share it now with these amazing people that helped me through that time, and see the growth not only in myself but collectively. And I'm really happy that mental health is being talked about more, because Coach Wiese was so pivotal in helping me get through that and just becoming a better man. So yeah, it's honestly a pleasure to see it all come together and come to light.
Yeah, man, it's beautiful to see the film, and it's beautiful to see that mental health as this sort of team sport. It takes sort of a whole team. And that's why it's awesome to have, Coach here with us as well. And Coach, as you're seeing this and you're revisiting this as well, kind of seeing Jack's story, in Georgetown men's soccer history, what does your voice in the mental health space look like since then? And, you've played such a pivotal role in that story, both for Jack personally as well as for, the other teammates. Maybe speak to that a bit, just kind of what that's been like for you.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the sort of, for lack of a better term, great stories in my coaching career, because of how it unfolded and Jack's role in it. And I'm given a lot of credit in it, but I don't feel like I really deserve as much as sort of is given, because I think so many people were involved in this. But it always comes back to Jack, right? And it always comes back to none of this happens if he doesn't take some very brave first steps along the way, and maybe also really lucky that he was surrounded by some people who were really there to say, all right, well, how do we help? And he, I think, was also lucky enough to have some really close friends, some childhood friends who he grew up playing with, who were on that team. And, everything really kind of, it was one of those scenarios where you're just like, thank God it happened how it happened. But at the end of the day, it's one of those stories where it's like, well, Jack is really the star of the story in every capacity on it. And I get pretty emotional when I see the trailer, because you remember, the really hard times in it. But I think I also remember the really great times that ended up coming through on the backside of it too, which it's a feel good story for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah, 100%. And, I feel like just like any good team win, there could be somebody maybe who was at the forefront. It took Jack taking sort of that courageous first step, but it took you having the kind of response that you did, because there are often times when we speak with athletes and they don't get greeted with that kind of response, right? And that story could have been a team loss, actually, not a team win as it did here. So it's just wonderful on our end to be able to see kind of all of the bits and pieces that come along, the same way that it takes a team sort of cooperation to get a win on the pitch, on the field, on wherever you are. It takes a team to sort of be able to get that mental health win too. And that's why I'm curious from both of your perspectives, what do you think makes it important right now for athletes to be able to have this conversation about their mental health? As more of these combos are happening at the forefront, what makes, especially, with the player and the coach, why is this so important, and why is it important now for athletes to be able to engage in this conversation?
It's something that I'll talk about it from my point of view, the coach's point of view, where we interact with the team, and we interact with individuals, and we try to get to what each player is like, what each person is like, but there's so much that goes unsaid, at every level, personal, even within the sport, and how are they really feeling, and are they frustrated, are they happy, something going on outside of the field, and so much goes unsaid, because there is an expectation on the athlete's point of view to say, hey, I'm here to do a job, and I'm going to, I'm not going to be high maintenance, and I'm going to show up, and I'm going to, I don't want to bring extra baggage, I just want to play the sport. And it's a hard thing it's very hard for me to think, well, how do I, if Jack doesn't open up and say, hey, I'm having trouble, then I just don't know what's happening. And, if somebody sprains an ankle, right, an ankle swell, you see it, you can't move that well. We all know as coaches, you're supposed to rest and elevate, press, and we have all the instructions for what to do for the ankle sprain, and then when it's feeling pretty good, and you can. That doesn't happen, and if you have an anxiety attack or you're depressed or you have any, there's nothing to show for it, really, right? There's no swollen ankle to look at, and there's certainly in our world very, very little instruction with what do you do when you come across it. So it's we try to. I'll use Jack's story all the time with our current team. We just say, hey, we had this situation, and this is why it worked, and I always hope that, having the conversation and bringing it up sort of lets people sort of understand that there's a space there if they need to have sort of a similar conversation, with me, somebody else. It doesn't happen with a coach all the time too. But it's a really hard thing to navigate, and it's because there's such a cloak of, it's very hard to open that cloak, and everybody's got it, and this is why I think Jack's story is so unique, is because he was super brave and continues to be honest, very brave to be open to talking about something that's, not really easy to talk about.
I think it takes having an open door from both the athlete and the coach side to be open to conversation, open to just honesty in general with what's going on. Because I think from a coach's perspective, correct me if I'm wrong, coach, that, it's helpful to have information physically and emotionally and just in general with what's going on within your player, both on and off the field. So if you don't share that, then you can't get the help that you might need, because a coach is there to help at the end of the day. And from a player's side, and it's important to have an open door as well. Often coaches will say, my door is open, but it's only open if you walk through it. So you got to walk through that door and have the conversation about what's going on, and trust that you have someone in your corner that will be there to help. And if it's not a coach, it can be a teammate. And if it's not a teammate, it can be a friend. And that's just why it's really great to have a helpful support system, a trusting support system around you.
Yeah. And that's oftentimes like a life-saving thing, like just having that I love the way you're putting it there, Coach, that there's this cloak, right? It's an invisible kind of pain, but it's part of the reason why we've seen, suicide rates double in student athletes over the last 20 years, because folks are suffering in silence, right? But when they're seeing that, when they can sort of take off that cloak and they're able to walk in through that door, as like you're saying, Jack, and be greeted with, love and support and encouragement and empathy, that can oftentimes be literally a life-saving move, to a young person who's struggling. And maybe to that point, sometimes one of the things that hold people back is sort of what you think is going to happen on the other side, right? Like if I said something, what's going to happen, right? So folks have these sort of myths, in sports that we kind of need to challenge. What are you kind of seeing as far as a barrier that would keep someone from making that step, Coach? Maybe a reason that somebody would maybe want to speak with their coach, want to be open, but they have this misconception, they have a myth, they have a stigma, they have something that they've heard growing up of what it means to be an athlete. And sometimes that prevents them from taking that sort of brave choice that Jack took.
It's in everything. I'll talk to like our current team. I'll see someone when they come into training, regular day of training, and you just say, hey, how you doing? And the answer is never, oh man, I'm having a hard time with calc, or I'm feeling blue about this, or it's, oh, my ankle's a little sore. Everybody's always like, great, right? Like, and I know, my question isn't really a probing question, and their answer certainly is not an answer with any information other than it's like, hey, how are you? I'm doing fine. How are you doing? Right? Like, and so like you have to go deeper than that sometimes, but when it's remarkable. Some players don't want to I don't want to tell them I have an upset stomach. I don't want to tell them I have a little bit of this. I don't want to tell them because I just don't want it to affect anything, right? The level of competition that these guys feel and the pressure they put themselves under to be, okay in every aspect. We have wellness survey that we give the guys, and they never tell you when they're sore, really. Right? They never say they're tired. It's always a 1 out of 10, which is I'm a 4, but they maybe didn't sleep at all the night before because of some reason, right? Like you just don't get the information. They don't want to give it, and because they just don't want to be a problem. They don't want to rock a boat. They don't want to whatever, and that's just the way these guys communicate. And I think if you think of Jack and the team he was in, the environment he was in at Georgetown, it's super competitive, super high achieving players, right? And man, like if I don't do this, I'll open the door for this guy, and maybe I'll never see the field, and or whatever it is. So I think the level of trust is something that's you have to earn. And some of it's personality based and those things too. And some kids will, and Jack's situation is a perfect one, to be fair. Cause like, we had 2 different conversations really, right. About what was going on with him. And the first one was him saying, hey, I can't, I just can't play soccer anymore. And not really explaining what the root cause of any of it was. And, Jack, the reaction in the office with me and my coaches was like, well, everybody's trying to figure out, well, what's going on, right? What's going on? And so it's like, well, this is what, how do we should talk him into it. How do we, and at the end of the day, it's like, well, if he doesn't want to play soccer anymore, he doesn't want to play soccer. I can't make him want to play soccer. Right. So, but you don't know why you can't, and so we're having this conversation that's completely unproductive. People are surmising this and they're guessing that, and none of it's right. Because we just, we're just, hey, but then, the second time we have the conversation where he says, hey, I don't know if I can do this again. And this is why I'm getting these unbelievable anxiety attacks. It doesn't let me I can't function. Right. Suddenly it's amazing how different that conversation is in our office, because it's not just me, it's me and everybody else around the team who's like trying to like help the situation. And boy, we get great ideas from once everybody understands it. Like suddenly one of my assistants, his wife had a history of some of this. Like, let me connect Jack with her, and they can talk about this. And Coach Boole, Jack, I think this. We were talking about traveling with the team, right? We got to go play a road game, and you got to get in the hotel, and we're putting together rooming lists. And Coach Boole, one of my assistants, who's wonderfully thoughtful about a lot of these things, he says, you know what? Hey, let's room Jack with Rio and Dante, because these are the two guys he grew up playing with, who, by the way, idolize Jack Beer, right? They think he's the best thing in the planet, right? But there are two people that Jack feels really comfortable with, right? They're calming influences on him, right? And so it was Boole's idea to say, hey, well, let's put those guys together as roommates and just leave them as roommates the entire bit, because sometimes hotels might trigger Jack. And what a great idea! I hadn't really thought about that yet, right? And so suddenly we have this whole support staff, trying to figure out like, well, what can we do? How does this help? Is this working? Is this not so? But it's all based on, what a difference between conversation 1 and conversation 2 and making that happen.
I love that. Jack, from your point of view, man, what would you say is something that kind of prevents folks from taking that step?
I think it's just fear in general. The idea of fear, the idea that, like Coach Wiese said, that your performance is going to be affected, and it's a very competitive environment. But I think what I didn't realize at the time was that not only was I not the only one going through it, but I feel the only one I was hurting was myself by not speaking up and speaking out to, it didn't have to be all the way to panic attacks and Coach Wiese. It could have started with a friend or a teammate. But yeah, at the end of the day, I think it's a very competitive environment, and I find it's a common trend to hide parts of yourself in order to prevent a future situation from happening. And life is a lot in the present moment. So if in the present moment you feel a certain emotion, it's important to express that, whether that's dealing with it yourself or having teammates and friends around you that can support you through it. And yeah, like Coach Wiese said, I mean, I had, there's a saying, it takes a village. I had a village around me, in my teammates, in Coach Wiese, in Coach Boole, in Coach Casper, Coach Samuel. I mean, people that, who am I forgetting? Trainer Jess, just so many people that I think at first you build this negative idea, this not trusting idea that it's going to hurt you if you express yourself, whether that's good or bad. And the reality that I found out was that here was a village of people that wanted to help me and wanted to work with me. They weren't saying, okay, you have anxiety, you're not going to play. They said, okay, you have anxiety, how can we help? And that was so powerful for me, because in my head, I wasn't aware that that was an option. And yeah, it was just the most beautiful experience, from literally in the dark to the light at the end of the season.
Out of the dark, man. That's aptly named here. That's perfect. And and as you're describing that sort of out of the dark experience, right, and you're talking about this village, I know as Coach sort of alluded to, sometimes even if the coach is checking on you, it can feel like it's it's not the most probing question initially. If you're a teammate, let's say, and you kind of feel like, something might not be exactly on point with my teammate, but I don't want to be, intrusive. I don't want to be nosy, right? Like, what could somebody do to like make sure that they're present, make sure that they're aware, make sure that they're being part of the village for their teammate and being a good teammate? What would you sort of recommend to that person on being a good teammate to check on your buddy there?
Yeah, I always love the question, how are you? I think it's really simple. It's 3 words. And if you say it like you mean it, it means a lot to the person receiving it. And people have the choice. Like you said, Coach Wiese, they have the choice to say fine and move on. And that's their decision. Or if you ask it maybe once, twice, 3 times, maybe by the 3rd time, they'll get the sense that they really care how you are. And they might say a little bit more than fine. They might say, I kind of had a hard day, or I had a great day. I mean, you don't really know what you're going to get. But if you don't, use your voice, use your communication, then I think, like Coach Wiese said, people are actually in the dark about how you feel, and people can't read minds, obviously. So that's why, I think if you want to be a curious and supportive teammate, just asking how are you and not really forcing the situation, just being curious, is a great way to start.
I love that. And coach, maybe your take on this too, because I know, being in a team sport by nature, you want to make sure that folks are supporting each other while they're playing the game, and it sounds like you were also very in tune in terms of, what dynamics there were. Oh, here are the folks that, these guys grew up playing together, or here's somebody who would do well even, rooming together on the road. What are some ways that you sort of help folks, help these young people develop the idea of being a good teammate and looking out for your teammate, both, when you're playing, but also when you're not playing? How do those principles how do they grow in that idea of being a good teammate?
We hope for accountability on everybody, right? We want everybody to be accountable for how they're doing and what they're doing. And we always say, well, make sure no one cleans up your mess, right? Make sure you're, literally make sure you clean up after yourself when you're at breakfast table, right? Like put your stuff away, don't leave it, whatever, right? But it also can be, don't mess up your assignment on a defensive corner kick, right? And somebody else has to clean it. But a good teammate is someone who's trying to make sure that you're accountable for not leaving a mess, and but is also very willing to clean up when you do make one, right? To the time you do, because everyone will have a little moment where they don't get it quite right, or they oversleep, or they maybe forget something. And good teammates are the ones who are saying, hey, don't do that, don't forget this, but when you do mess up, I got your back, and I'll clean that up for you, because I know at some point you'll have to clean up something of mine, right? And we're all endeavoring not to have that happen for us, but we're all there to support you when you mess up, so to speak, right? Or you have something that needs to be handled. And we've been better with some things. I think one of the things our current team does, which I'm really quite proud of, is we have accountability groups where we have seniors, old guys, and some younger guys that meet in groups of 3. I think it is like just little groups of 3 or 4. Typically 3 is a really nice number for it, where they talk about how are they doing, and have real conversations with each other. And they meet regularly every, I think, 2 weeks or 1 week or whatever, that window of time that makes sense for them. And typically it's in the spring and the winter when we're not quite in a competitive environment yet. We're sort of preparing to get into it in our fall and to try to foster some relationships, right? Where you have a senior or a rising senior, we call them seniors, rising senior, who has maybe a sophomore and a freshman, and they're talking about what they want to be held accountable to. What is it they want to get better at? How are they doing? What are their goals for academics? What are their social goals? How are they, whatever it is. And all it really is just a way for people to understand what's kind of important to those guys. And then you have someone who's there to try to help them and give them advice and talk about it. And we have the seniors come back, and, every 2 weeks they come in and we say, how's your group doing? And they love debriefing. They love it. They sit there and they want to debrief about, so-and-so wants to get better with ball striking, so I'm helping with ball striking. And he's really having a hard time getting sleep right now. So we're trying to get him, right? But they have this, they love it. And then they take some ownership and trying to help that guy do some things. But at the core of it, you're also hoping it just lets them start to get to know each other really too, right? Let's have some conversations where you actually might know when someone's not doing great, because you have a handle on that. So that stuff, a lot of it is stemmed off of some of the things we learned from Jack's experience. It's like, well, how do we get people to have each other's backs? And that locker room that we had there was a great locker room for support, but you have to work to kind of make sure that that's something that doesn't go away if you can help it.
I think growing up, you idealize being a professional soccer player so heavily that when you get to college, at least in my experience, I looked at these guys like they were Messi and Ronaldo, like that's who I was competing with. So when you're looking at them like Messi and Ronaldo, you're not going to say, hey, Messi, I'm a little scared today. You're going to say like, oh my God, like I'm competing against Messi and Ronaldo. I can't be scared. So I think it's important to remember that at the core of it, we're all human beings. We all share the same feelings. So when we share those feelings and experiences with each other and just treat each other as human beings, as friends who just so happen to be playing at Georgetown University, I think the conversations become easier and the help becomes more natural. It's not as forced.
That's really profound, Jack. And I think sometimes that's what we're missing in all of this stuff, is that we get this sort of rigid mindset, whether it's as athletes or as folks who are working. You just get caught up in this role that I have a job to do, I have a role to play, and you don't get to be able to connect with the human on the other side. And it's hard to be able to know if someone is not their usual if you don't know what their usual really is. If you don't have a personal connection with the person to know, this is the usual Jack. This is Jack on a Wednesday, right? So I love that sort of concerted, real effort to have authentic relationship, and that's going to probably outlast the season. It's going to outlast the playing time, when you're just competing for a championship. So let's say, Jack, maybe if you could take me for a second, you're this rising senior and I'm, a rookie coming in and I'm trying to, get my bearings in Georgetown. How would you sort of guide me or advise me of, from things that you've learned along this whole journey in terms of taking care of my well-being, my overall sort of mental health? What's something that you would, share with the young rookie like myself?
Yeah, I think the beauty of life is that when you are that senior, you knew how it was to feel as a freshman. So you know the feelings inside, the tendency to be a little bit scared of the seniors, to ask them questions, to know that figuring out your classes are a little tricky, to know that everything is so new naturally, and that there's going to be a bunch of questions for freshmen. So from a senior's point of view, it's their choice, to help someone answer those questions for them and guide them in the right way. So that maybe one day when they are seniors, not only have they figured those questions out, those answers themselves, but then they can be in a great position to help other freshmen. And then that's the legacy and the history of the program there, is that you have willing and helpful seniors and older and elder people to help the newbies, so to speak. And almost just assume that it's going to be very similar to your experience and really just trust yourself in your own experience. And, it's nothing outside of what those seniors already know. So from my point of view, if I was a senior, I'd be asking the question, how are you, probably 5 times instead of just one to my other teammates who might be freshmen. I'd say, if you need anything, just let me know, more often than not. And just leave that door open. Just leave that door open for them. And, don't force it. It's their choice whether they want to walk through it or not. But just letting them know that the door is open for them and that you're here if they need is a really powerful tool.
Well, one thing I just wanted to get into for a second here, as Jack, as you were saying, kind of what the individual would do, how you'd sort of look out for a young freshman coming in. I just wanted to get your perspective, Coach, from like a culture standpoint, right? That Jack mentioned this word, like legacy of the program, right? And sometimes when you're trying to do that in a way that can encourage good work ethic and habits and discipline and winning and such, what's something that sort of a team can do to establish this culture of like openness and camaraderie and being able to like support well-being? If somebody's listening who's on the big picture end of a team, somebody who is on the coaching front, on the front office kind of world there, how do you sort of create that culture?
I think there's probably a lot of things you can do, right? Everybody's got it. Probably, if you think about it and you're able to evolve with your current scenario and current types of people and personalities you have, I think you got to be careful you don't get set in a formulaic kind of thing. You just got to kind of be aware of it and think about it. One of my assistants, Connor Klakota, has this great thing where he just goes crazy whenever all of the freshmen are doing something, and then all of the sophomores are here doing something, and all of the seniors are here. And so he is perpetually dialed into, are people segmenting themselves by class? And, are they sitting together at lunch in their classes? Are they, before practice, passing the ball and hanging out, waiting for practice to start, just clumped in their classes? And it's not something I really, I'm aware of it, but not something I'm really attuned to, but like he is. And boy, he just starts making these comment, guys, I didn't realize that we had to all hang out in our own little classes. We had to do it. And they he's talked about it enough. They know it. Then suddenly they all start interweaving with each other and they do it. But I think the ability not to segment a team by seniority, right? There's things that there are older players will lead with and by. One of my favorite stories that wasn't something that was really planned or anything. It was just something we reacted to with Jack's national championship year back in 2019 when we won. Was the very first day of sleeping in hotels. We put guys 3 to a hotel room, and usually the way you think about that is you have 2 beds and a fold out couch. So who goes on the fold out couch? It's always a freshman. It has to be a freshman, right? Right. But we did some things a little differently that year, and one of which is we decided our 3 senior captains hadn't spent enough time this summer together to really think about the team, right? They hadn't really spent, they just weren't together. And we said, you know what, for this first week of preseason and this 3 to a room scenario, we're going to put all the captains together. And so they're like, well, okay, hold on. So wait, one of us has to go on a pull-out couch, or we got to share the bed, or what are we going to, how are we going to, and we also did that on a couple other things. We had reasons to put some guys together, which actually precluded, there was 2 juniors and a senior in another room. And it was a near mutiny the first night with some of the seniors. They're so upset because this isn't, when they were freshmen, they slept on the couch. This now is their turn, and we had a real conversation as a team that day about, well, let's say you walk into a room and there's 3 of you going into that room, and there's 2 beds and there's a fold out couch, and you drop your duffel bag on a bed. What are you telling your teammate? Right? What are you telling your teammate by dropping that you're more important? Your sleep is more important than his. And just to say, like, you have to be aware that that's what that's saying. And is that the right thing that the team needs and all this? And it was this wonderful conversation. But what it really did was, and by the way, they completely embraced the whole thing. They were sending pictures. They're all in the same bed together, sending photos to each other. And we asked the seniors to say, all right, listen, you're going to stay in the rooms that we made for the first 5 days. And then you're going to give me a new set of roommates for the next 5 days. But you got to tell me why you're putting those guys together, right? So you sort of talk about that stuff. But what it really did was it leveled everyone together. It immediately shifted it from senior, junior, sophomore to just teammates, right? With different levels of experience, but they're teammates. And that ended up being, I think, I'll look back on a lot of things on that season and that team, but that team was incredibly supportive of each other, regardless of whether you're a freshman, sophomore, junior, or senior. And they were incredibly talented. And they had different levels of experience for sure, but everyone was leaned on for the success of that season. And I thought that was a pretty important piece to say, hey, how do we get to a situation where we're just teammates, and not some hierarchy that's historically adhered to by a lot of people and a lot of teams in general.
When you were just talking, Coach Wiese, like, it reminded me of the final that we were in, the national championship, where we go to penalties, and who's cramping? Achara, senior, Dottie, junior. Like, we had older guys that were not available to win us that national championship. And we had half of our penalty takers, freshmen. Goalie that saved the winning penalty kick, freshman. And I think it stems all the way back from that decision, Coach, of, hey, we're all equal here. And you might be a senior. You might have not more power, but more wisdom to be able to spread and share to the younger guys to help us become a true team. And that's the only way you win, is by being a team. That sometimes that's the most powerful, thing you can, quote unquote, train.
I love that. And in some ways that kind of brings us full circle to what we're talking about, because, mental health concerns are the ultimate equalizer too. They don't discriminate between if you're a freshman or a senior, if you're a coach or a player. In some ways, we're all going through our own sort of out of the dark journey, right? Our own path there to be able to go from where we are to where we want to be. So, as we sort of close out this conversation, which has been incredible, maybe if each of you can share one last sort of parting message, right? Like, Coach, if you're speaking to other coaches, if you're speaking to parents, if you're speaking to folks who are in this world of sort of mentoring and bringing young people along in their journey, what's one thing that you'd want them to know about from what you've learned in Jack's story and just kind of your experience overall in this whole process around mental health and well-being in athletes?
I think maybe the most important thing that I take away from really, Jack taught me so much, right? Which I'm forever grateful for in terms of, things that are things you learn through experience, right? And my experience with Jack was something that I learned through, and we don't take for granted a lot of things that people take for granted, right? But I think the ability to listen and recognize that, my assumptions on where someone's coming from a lot of times can be things that are self-induced and formed from my presumption about something, or my assumption about something, or my ignorance about something, right? And I might assume that this is what that comment meant, or I might assume that this is why this player seems so distant, or I assume this is why this player seems so happy, or this is, and to recognize that most conflict and most tension happens when there's not good communication. That's plain and simple, right? If I have a team of right now 28 players and a staff of 6 people, if there's some tension that gets formed, it's usually because something's not communicated well. And it's remarkable how well-intentioned people are in general, right? And a lot of times things get misconstrued, and suddenly it's I think the worst about, and had nothing to do with what the reality was. And communication is a hard art form, because even when I'm trying to communicate something, I can send a text and it can be interpreted 17 different ways based on receivers reading into it. And just work to try to be sure about something, to make sure that the level of communication is really, really good, so you do understand, maybe what's driving somebody or what's really frustrating somebody. And I got countless stories of things where I made a huge assumption on something that happened, and I got that so wrong. I didn't realize that's why that you had said that thing, and that's why you reacted that way. And man, as soon as you get the information, you tend to be able to look back and be like, oh, okay, I see where you're coming from, right? And just be patient with that, and be patient with each other, and really work to communicate well and to understand. And everyone's got different ways of doing that.
Yeah, I agree with Coach Wiese. I think communication is so important, and the same way that coach maybe can't assume something about his players, I can't assume something about my coach that he's not going to trust me with being open and honest and just being a good friend and there for me and a good coach. I think in addition, like you said, we're all learning every day. I think it's a lifelong thing. So in addition to that, from my point of view, I was scared to make all these mistakes and to quote unquote fail. And people always say like, fail. It's really important to fail so you learn. But once you literally get that word out of your vocabulary, you just realize like all you're doing is living. And within living, like life is not perfect. And you are going to make quote unquote mistakes. And you learn from those mistakes, and they help you grow. They help you learn to utilize that lesson and help you the next day or the next month or whenever you learn the lesson. But if you don't quote unquote make the mistake, you're never going to learn the lesson, and you're never going to be able to use that to your advantage. And people wait their whole lives to make this one mistake, and really what they don't realize is they just never end up learning the lesson to create a better life. So I'm really happy I made these mistakes. I made these quote unquote failures, but yeah, coach, like you've taught me so much. I mean, Coach Bull, Coach Connor, I could name so many names, just everyone around you. And the best part is that they're the people right next to you. Sometimes we look at professional athletes like Messi and Ronaldo to learn off of, and the best teachers are the people right around you. The communication and the conversations that we can have are right in front of our face every day. So I would, just urge people to ask, how are you, more often.
Well said, Jack. Well said. And I'll tell you that, I certainly have learned a lot, from you and from Coach Wiese, just kind of both in this conversation and this incredible film, kind of seeing your journey, your story. And I just want to encourage anyone who's tuned into this conversation. This is such an incredible film, an incredible conversation that you'd want to have with your teammates, your coaches, your whole staff, and it can bring out something that would be life-saving, really. And we encourage you to watch that together, and then we wouldn't want to leave you without resources afterwards. One of the things that we're very proud to do at AFH is partner up with Johns Hopkins University School of Public Health and create this Center for Athlete Wellbeing, which have just a number of free resources on athlete well-being, whether you're figuring out how to get better sleep or how to perform better on the field or court, or dealing with your own anxiety or sadness, anything like that. This is a place where you can go to for free resources. So we encourage you to go there to get some of those resources. And I want to also just give a chance for Coach. Are there other resources that folks can access at Georgetown for mental health they should be aware of as well?
Well, Georgetown does a good job. I think most universities, to be fair, really do good jobs for the CAPS program they have, which is counseling and available to all students. The athletic department has 2 full-time people dedicated to meet with athletes about anything, really, at the end of the day with that. But and I'll say this, and I remember this with Jack, and I think I'm remembering this correctly, Jack. You can tell me if I'm wrong. I actually, when you were opened up and said, "Hey, I'm having some trouble," and I said, "Well, here, go and see, the doc," and I, Jack went, and Jack was like, "Nah, didn't do anything for me." Right? It wasn't helpful. So I was like, well, let's find somebody new. Don't just say like, it's not going to work. Like, find somebody else, see who, maybe somebody else you can resonate with a little bit. And, so don't, that for me actually was actually pretty important too, because, not everybody's easy to sort of find solutions with and around, but there are services on campuses everywhere. Make use of them, especially in this time in your lives, right? When you're that age, so much going on, so much pressures, and you can go a lot of different directions really quickly. So make use of the resources the universities provide.
100%. I just want to thank you again, Coach. I want to thank you, Jack, for both this conversation and just kind of really mirroring an example of an incredible team win in this whole story, right? And the encouragement for folks to make use of resources that are on their campus, resources that are available to them, online, and to kind of stick with the process, right? It may not be, a one-shot deal where you find the perfect match as far as a great therapist that's a fit for you or the perfect resource that's a fit for you, but just know that there are so many resources out there, and one of them will be the right one, and we are one of them. We want to be someone alongside you that can help you in your athlete well-being journey. So just want to thank you again, Coach and Jack, and really looking forward to having this film be widely viewed all over the country, because it's not just inspiring and personal and beautiful, but I really believe it's life-saving in many, many ways. So couldn't thank you enough, and appreciate you having the conversation tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.